Can a driver discover a secret that not even his own team knew about his car? Ferrari thought it understood every inch of the SF25 until Lewis Hamilton got into the car in Mexico and changed everything. What the engineers saw in the telemetry not only left them speechless, but made them rethink the entire aerodynamic design of the car. What exactly did Hamilton find, and how can this redefine the Italian team's performance in 2025? What began as just another practice at altitude had become a turning point. Without needing to speak, Hamilton was telling the team, "The potential is here, you just haven't figured out how to find it yet." And that was the beginning of the mystery. As the engineers began to dissect every piece of data that Hamilton's car had thrown up in FP2, they came across a pattern that seemed to contradict everything they had known about the SF25 until then. The car had not been modified. There were no radical changes to the engine maps, suspension, or rear wing. However, telemetry was showing higher aerodynamic performance than projected. The reason? A sequence of events that could only have been triggered by the way Hamilton drove the car. The most revealing data was the behavior of the air vortices under the floor of SF25. Throughout the season, Ferrari had suffered with a very narrow operating window. The car was effective only under ideal conditions, but outside that window, it easily lost stability. This generated very unstable rear aerodynamics and, as a direct consequence, excessive tire wear and loss of traction when exiting corners. The engineers knew this, but they had not found a real solution. What they saw with Hamilton in Mexico, however, challenged that limit. In the medium-speed corners of Sector 2, Hamilton not only maintained a constant line, but executed weight transitions with almost surgical smoothness. His corner entry was not aggressive, but neither was it conservative. It was calculated to the millimeter. And what this caused was an unexpected stabilization of the aerodynamic vortices that are generated under the flat bottom of the car, allowing the diffuser to maintain stable suction throughout the curve. This detail, imperceptible to the naked eye, translated into an increase of approximately 5% in rear downforce during key corners. But more importantly, that percentage remained constant over several laps. It was not a lucky moment or a specific condition. It was a repeatable consequence of the Britain's driving style. Simply put, Hamilton hadn't just gotten the most out of the car. He had taught the car how he wanted it to work. Ferrari couldn't believe it. How was it possible that something that their supercomputers had failed to anticipate was happening before their eyes through pure human intervention? The CFD simulations, the Maranello wind tunnel, the predictive models, all failed to detect that under certain piloting conditions, the SF25 could be much more stable than they had ever believed. The contrast with the rest of the year was brutal. Until then, Ferrari had tried to force the car's performance through new parts, revised wings, alternative floors, extreme setups. But Hamilton had achieved it only with a natural sensitivity. The secret was in how the car received the lateral load. His progressive corner entry, his almost imperceptible brake modulator, and his ability not to break the car's line of fluidity with unnecessary inputs, activated a hidden synergy between aerodynamics and suspension that no other driver had achieved. Thus, Hamilton's discovery was not simply a technical discovery. It was a moment of enlightenment. Ferrari understood that its car not only required mechanical adjustments, but also a complete reinterpretation of how it should be driven. The SF25 was not a car to be tamed by strength or mathematical precision. It was a car that demanded empathy. And Hamilton, unintentionally, had found the key. To understand the true impact of the discovery made by Hamilton, it is necessary to put it in context with the unique conditions offered by the Mexican Grand Prix. The Autódromo Hermanos Rodríguez is one of the biggest technical challenges on the calendar. Not because of its design per se, but because of its location. At more than 2,200 meters above sea level, the air density is approximately 25% lower than in circuits located at sea level. This condition completely changes the rules of the game. The reduction in air density has a triple consequence. It decreases aerodynamic efficiency, reduces the cooling capacity of all the car's systems, and limits the power delivery of the internal combustion engine, even in this hybrid era. For this reason, teams must configure their cars with an extreme level of downforce, a la Monaco or Hungary, although in practice this downforce does not translate into effective grip. It is, in many ways, an aerodynamic illusion. For Ferrari, these conditions posed an even greater challenge. The SF25 had demonstrated during the first part of the championship a pathological sensitivity to changes in ride height. The car was effective only in an extremely limited working range. Even minor changes to the rake or rear axle height could ruin stability. Added to this were its structural thermal management problems. something that became evident during the Singapore GP, where the brakes thermally collapsed and both Hamilton and Leclerc had to perform the entire race using lift and coast aggressively to keep the discs at a safe temperature. With this information in hand, Ferrari arrived in Mexico with a technical package full of defensive adjustments. The SF25 was presented with the most ventilated engine hood of the entire season, introducing 5 lateral gills on the right side and additional openings on the left. This design was not aimed at improving performance, but simply at surviving overheating. A loss in aerodynamic efficiency was even accepted in exchange for cooling critical systems, a difficult but necessary decision. In practice, this meant the car was in a delicate position, aerodynamically loaded to compensate for altitude, structurally open to release heat, and yet on the brink of thermal collapse. In other words, Ferrari was driving a compromised car from every angle. He had no room for errors. And yet, in that adverse context, Hamilton managed to make the SF25 shine. This contrast was what impacted the team the most. While Leclerc struggled with a car that seemed imprecise, nervous in transitions and wore the tires quickly, Hamilton achieved stability. He did it not because the car was in better condition, but because he had found a way of driving that mitigated those problems at their roots. Hamilton, in just one practice session, had provided a new benchmark. The car worked, but only if it was driven a certain way. It wasn't a design defect, it was a misreading of it. And this forced us to review everything, from Leclerc's historical feedback, through the decisions made during winter development, to the evolution plans for the second half of the championship. What happened at the Mexican Grand Prix with Lewis Hamilton was much more than a technical discovery. What seemed like a simple free practice became a turning point that has begun to redefine not only Ferrari's operational approach, but also its identity as a team in the 2025 season. Until then, the Maranello team had worked with a technical concept that prioritized mechanical and aerodynamic development over driver sensitivity. But that philosophy began to falter. On a human level, this episode has injected a dose of confidence and cohesion within the team. Many within Ferrari had become accustomed to living with technical frustration, to living with a car that always seemed on the verge of working, but never finished doing so. Hamilton has shown that sometimes what is missing is not a new piece, but a new perspective, and that has sparked renewed motivation among the Maranello coaches. Now, they work not only to correct errors, but to discover new opportunities hidden in what they already have. The implications also extend to the fight for second place in the championship. Although McLaren leads strongly, and Red Bull is always a latent threat with Verstappen, Ferrari has found in this discovery a reason to believe that they are still in the fight. Not from aggressive development or unlimited budget, but from a deep understanding of what they have already built. And that, in a category where development is increasingly limited by regulation, may be the key differentiator. Therefore, what happened in Mexico should not be seen as a simple anecdote. It is Ferrari's first big step towards a more intelligent, more human way of competing, more attuned to the details that do not appear on the graphics. It is the sign that, perhaps, the path to the title lies not only in the most effective wing, but in the pilot who knows when to release the brake 2 milliseconds earlier. What happened at the Autódromo Hermanos Rodríguez was not simply a technical lesson. It was a strategic revelation, a silent but forceful demonstration that Formula One continues to be a sport where the human factor can change the course of a season. Lewis Hamilton, in a scenario of altitude, reduced atmospheric pressure and adverse conditions, achieved something that the best simulation software, the most advanced wind tunnels and the most complex computer models could not foresee, unlocking the true character of a car that until then had been misunderstood. And even more so, will Leclerc be able to adapt to this new vision of the car? Can Ferrari integrate this sensitivity into its technical DNA, and not simply rely on the instinct of a single driver? Is this the push that will turn them from sporadic contenders into true title contenders? Do you think Ferrari will be able to turn this discovery into a sustained advantage? Or will it simply be an anomaly, an isolated flash in the middle of another irregular campaign? Leave me in the comments what you think about all this.